Allow me to ask you a question, gentle nemesis. What happened to the tribe of Dan? I have heard everything from they are mixed in with the Greeks all the way to the abominable. They are the Irish now. Wow. I think I know where they are using only the Tanakh as our guide. First, we must establish the tribe of Dan are still intact and will be with their brethren during Armageddon. How do we do this? By looking at the prophecy bestowed to him at the beginning. I will be using the Tanakh as our guide. Genesis 49, 1 through 17. And of course I'm going to skip. Quote, Jacob called for his sons and said, gather, and I will tell you what will happen to you at the end of days. Stop. Just about every 10 lost tribes or tribe of Dan doctrine I have heard or seen has just been made null and void. How? Because they all use the following prophecies to identify the tribes before the end of days. Guys, you can't use prophecies meant for the last days as an identifier at the beginning or the middle of the story, can you? Besides, we will be, I will be in Zion in the last days, not the Achilles Islands. But let's not tarry on small things like the foundation of your doctrine is built on quicksand. We have more to explore. I am skipping because, as you continue to remind me, I am not the best reader. And I want to get to the big Fig Newton. Verse 16 through 17. Quote, Dan will avenge his people, like one, the tribes of Israel. Stop! This is where the King James Version twists the meaning of the text. The KJV says judge, which doesn't give the right perception of the event. But even with the use of the word judge, wayward people acting like priests doesn't mean they were acting as judges. Priests aren't judges, are they? I know you want to point to the prophecy in Amos, don't you? Just hold your horses. We will get to that later. So as you can see, the tribe of Dan will be intact in the end days because he will be doing his brother a service. But let's continue. Quote, Dan will be a serpent on the road, a viper on the path, which bites the horse's heel so its rider falls backwards. Example. Your explanation for this verse is dependent on using this prophecy at the beginning of their stay in the promised land. Dan calls Israel to error. So, I can cast whatever you say out as false already. Tell you the truth, you guys had to make quantum leaps to achieve your explanation, and it still doesn't make sense. Looking at this prophecy the way it is supposed to be looked at, in days, puts an entirely different slant on the narrative. I think it's simple. Dan will stand in the gap against our enemies on the battlefront as a sneak attack. Deuteronomy 33 and 22. Quote, and of Dan he said, Dan is a young lion streaming from Bashan. Example. So we have two prophecies with Dan as a predator with the element of surprise. But wait, this prophecy actually tells us where this attack will take place. Bashan. Hold on to this because it is the cornerstone to the last part. Part 2. Thank you for listening to part 1. Come with me to part 2, the middle. Everybody has read about the tribe of Dan in the Tanakh, how they had to stay on ships because they didn't conquer the land like they were supposed to and was driven off. But here is a very brief summary of the events afterwards. 5, and it may be 6, warriors went to scout the land. They came up on a heathen's house of Micah, with a Levite serving as priest of his estate. They stayed there the night and returned to the ships. They gave a report of fertile lands, and the protection from the Sidonians was lacking. Hearing this report, Dan sent out 600 scary black warriors to conquer the land. When they came up on Micah's house, they entreated the Levite to come with them. Some say they forced him. And they took the idol Micah had made with them. When Michael found out he had been had by a bunch of niggers, a bunch of black Hebrew Israelites, they went after the Danites. But when they caught up to them, well, what would you do looking at a bunch of big black warrior niggers? No, I mean seriously, what would you do? Yeah, same thing he did. He backed down. They set up their own temple with Micah's idol as the centerpiece, and the northern tribes went a-whoring. The book of Judges tells us this went on until the captivity of the land by the Assyrians. 3 different ways. Okay, so it is established the tribe of Dan as a whole, went into captivity with the rest of the 10 tribes. We know through the Tanakh and history, the Assyrians had a thing for playing musical chairs with their conquered people. Surely we know the Assyrians didn't place the 10 tribes together. They would be too strong and revolt. So it is plausible the tribes were split up. To get the nuance of my theory, you must think like an evil capitalist businessman for just a second. Not very long, just a second. You know, your average friendly neighborhood Mr. Charlie. I will give you a second or two to sink into depravity. Are you there yet? Are you there yet? Oh yeah, I know. There are so many demons around you talking. You can't even think straight right now. But I need for you to focus. Even if you got to close your eyes real tight and recite Walking Through the Valley of the Shadow of Death poem. Do it, but focus. Okay, here we go. You just corporate rated a brand name business, and because you had to fire most of the staff that were loyal to the old regime, you are shorthanded on the actual labor force needed to make this company run to its peak potential. You are not worried about your executive staff because they came with you. You need the grunts that will actually fill in the spots that were vacated immediately, so your customers' orders can be filled without a hiccup in the system, which would affect the company's value on the stock market at its most crucial junction. What will you do? I know, those demons are making you dizzy, but I need for you to focus. Okay, you got the gist of the situation, right? I'm about to bring you out of Mr. Charlie's mindset. Make sure you leave those demons where you found them. Okay, welcome back. Question. Now can you see why Mr. Charlie is so conflicted? I said all of that to say, the tribes of Dan had knowledge of the sea. So it would only be capitalist logic to put them where they could serve their new masters best, the Assyrian seaport. In this next section, I will prove that is exactly where they are, the old Assyrian/Greek kingdom seaports. Part 3, the conclusion. Thank you for listening to part 2. Come with me. Allow me to ask you a question, General Nemesis. If I were to ask you who was the house of Jacob and the house of Joseph was, what would you say? I can't hear your answer because you are at home and this is a video. But I hope you are saying Jacob are the southern tribes and Joseph, Ephraim, are the northern tribes. Okay, saying that, check out this. Obadiah 17 through 20. Quote, and on Mount Zion there shall be a remnant, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall inherit those who inherited them. Stop! I get goosebumps every time I read this verse. Yay, Mr. Charlie. Your fear of black retribution, even if you did come to your senses in America, will be at hand. But enough about my wants and desires. We all have read about this period from other prophets and realized Jacob and Joseph were oppressed together and was released together and brought to Zion, right? Okay, let's keep going. Quote, and the house of Jacob all tribes, shall be fire, and the house of Joseph, all tribes, a flame, and the house of Esau shall become stubble, and they, who's they? All tribes, house of Jacob and the house of Joseph, shall ignite them and consume them, and the house of Esau shall have no survivors, for Yah has spoken. Stop. So as you can see, all of the tribes of Israel are present and making Esau sleep with the fishes. Verse 19 deals with what land and people they will possess. Again, the entire house of Israel are in the process of killing each and every one of the house of Esau, impaling Moab, and having our wishes met by Ammon. So let's continue. Quote, and this exile host of the children of Israel, who are with the Canaanites as far as Zaphareth, and the exile of Jerusalem, which is in Sephareth, shall inherit the cities of the Southland. Example, Zaphareth, which means ambush of the mouth, was the seaport of, guess where? Tyre and Sidon region. That's 1 Kings 17 and 9 and Luke 4 and 26. And scholars, supposed scholars, presume Sepharad is Sardis. Guess what Sardis is? Well, which is just above Tyre in Asia Minor. Sister, this is one part you got right. Guess what Sardis is supposed to be? Balak. Thank you. You got that right. I listened to you. Question. Am I the only person to connect these dots? Who are these people of the house of Israel? Excuse me, let me say that again. Who are these people of Israel if the house of Israel are taking care of business in the south? Let me say that again. Who are these people of Israel if the house of Israel are taking care of business in the south? The tribe of Dan. That's who. They were placed in seaport cities by the Assyrians to utilize their knowledge and might. We all know the Greeks didn't change people's culture, excluding Israel for their defiance. And if it isn't broke, they didn't fix it. To bolster my theory is the fact, you ready? Bashan is only a 2 days walk from Tyre, which would make each and every prophecy mentioned earlier make perfect sense. Why? Because for a northern army to come to Jerusalem, they would have to come directly past Dan. I believe Dan will do exactly what scriptures say he will do in the end days. Dan will avenge his brothers by laying in wait like a snake on the side of the road in the land of Bashan. When the opposing forces approach, he will leap, and the surprise will throw the rider back off his horse. You know, ambush work. But I know this is controversial, so I must pull out all stops to prove my theory. Here is one of the poison arrows I had in reserve for one of you smart guys. According to The Economist, very respected and vetted now, under black is not thought beautiful. Quote, the multilingual, fashion-conscious residents of Beirut, Lebanon's capital, modern-day Tyre and Sidon people, fancy their city to be cosmopolitan, but not everyone is welcome. Black people and foreigners from Asia and elsewhere, stop. Let me say that again. Black people and foreigners from Asia and elsewhere, stop. Notice, it's black people and foreigners from Asia and elsewhere, which could only mean that black people are not foreigners and have been around a long time. But let's keep going. Quote, in the third world, who make up the bulk of migrant workers are often turned away from the city's smarter venues. Conscious of the bad blood this could cause, Lebanon's government has warned beach clubs against barring entry on the basis of race nationality, or disability. But racism is unlikely to be erased overnight, either in Lebanon or in many other Middle Eastern countries where blacks are routinely looked down on. Racist taunts are often heard on Egypt's streets. In Libya, rebel militias often target darker-skinned people from nearby countries such as Chad and Mali, and from countries further south, accusing them of being mercenaries of Muammar Gaddafi. Well, we know how long this article has been. Check this next part out. Some people blame the legacy of the slave trade, which brought sub-Saharan Africans, wink wink, as well as others, wink wink, to the region from the 7th century onward. Example, see, we are still in each country being subjugated, just like you. It is very plausible Dan is still where the Assyrians took them and will help us out when the opportunity presents itself. Whew. Thank you for listening. Off the cuff. If you have a comment and it's conducive, or you're bringing me into focus of what I'm thinking, my theory, please leave a comment. If you come into me with that same old bull crap that y'all been saying for centuries, leave it. Leave it off the comment. Don't even say anything. But if it's fresh, if you can edify or you can correct me, do not let me go to the fire. Please do so.